we've been getting all kinds of rumors swirling and people discussing Kawhi and his knee soreness. Hasn't played any preseason, not necessarily any news on him. Any thoughts on Kawhi?
So I think the big problem, honestly, is that the impression I've been given from talking to people, and this I will say this could be wrong because the inherent nature of secrecy of Kawhi makes it to where misinformation can be spread even about his lack of communication. But like this is one of the key problems is like there's just not good communication between Kawhi's camp and anybody. Like they just don't share information with the team. And so like there are oftentimes like this has been reported that there were times when it was like he would just like show up, be like, yeah, practicing today. Cool. And so you never really kind of know with Kawhi. I just don't think you can expect him you just can't expect him. That's kind of the thing is like it's entirely possible Kawhi plays 70 games this season. It's entirely possible Kawhi plays 30 games this season. Like you can't have any expectation of him. You just kind of have to kind of see the results and acknowledge it. And if it's like, well, I really like this Clippers team because when Kawhi is healthy, okay, but like that's going to be an if. Like you can't bank on the Clippers being healthy, and you can't bank on Kawhi being available. It's just like a random occurrence that may or may not happen.
Besides the Kawhi injury, of course, is Chris Middleton. He had his bilateral ankle surgeries this summer, and I don't believe has played at all in the preseason. I'm not sure if they're targeting an opening night return or later into the season. But also Joel Embiid came out with a whole story that he did with Bontemps on how he's going to be wearing a knee brace and avoiding back-to-backs, and he's taking his health a lot more seriously this year. He hasn't played in the preseason. Last season was there was a lot made about how the league was right to institute all these new policies to limit rest days and all this stuff. And I know like in the schedule, we talked about how they're trying to lower, not back-to-backs necessarily, but those like really dense parts of the schedule, like 3 and 5s and like 5 and 7s and things like that. But with all the injuries that guys are having, like before we even get into the season, plus those that were sustained last season, like we talked on this show a lot about how like these playoffs just feels really weird because it feels like there are just like injuries up and down all of these rosters, especially in the East, right? And a lot of the guys that we talked about now are also on these Eastern Conference teams. Do you think that the narrative on just like fan and like general outrage over player rest is going to cool down this season, or is it just going to continue being how it's been?
I think it cooled off last season because they played, right? Like a lot of guys played injured because they wanted to try and get to the 65 game limit. Now I'm not a proponent of the 65 game limit, in part because like Haliburton didn't need to be playing. Like Hallie did not need to be playing in January when he was that banged up. But it's a good example, honestly, of like it hurt his game and it was probably very difficult for him. But also like like Tyrese Haliburton survived. He didn't die. This is part of the equation is that if you talk to players, there are injuries you can play through. It's a question of whether or not you should or have to. And like this is kind of the dividing line is if it's like, well, I don't need to play through this injury. Okay, but can you? Without further risk of injury? Yes. Okay, probably should tough it out and play. If it's this is gonna like this increases your risk of re-injury or further injury. Nope, sit out, right? Or if you're just like miserable, okay, sit out, get healthy, right? There are these lines because I think it's okay to feel like I think the league was correct that the players were missing too many games. Do I think the best answer to that is to shorten the schedule and then stretch it out so we have more time in between games? Absolutely. Will the players agree to it? No, because that means less money. Yeah. On top of the owners not agreeing to it because it's less money. And so what I wind up getting to is like, all right, when you sign the contract, you know what it's going to be. You know it's going to be 82 games. You know it's going to be mostly a game every other night, and you know there's going to be back-to-backs included. I don't think you need to play in back-to-backs. I think it's on the league's responsibility to remove back-to-backs from key matchups. I do not care if you skip versus the Charlotte Hornets on a Tuesday in January on the second night of a back-to-back. But if Charlotte's the first game on the back-to-back and the second game is versus a contender, play in the contender on national TV. They did much better with the schedule this year of getting the back-to-back games off of the national TV schedule. That's a huge step in the right direction, something that should have been addressed years ago. But like, there's got to be a balance here because my big thing with this is It's like I'm not obtuse to what the game takes from the players physically. One of the things I often say is if you go into an NBA locker room, you are going to see the toll. Like you're going to see what this looks like for guys that play every night and how much pain and discomfort that they're in. If you go to All-Star Weekend and you see the legends and you see the limps that those guys walk with, you realize what the game has taken from them physically. But there's a flip side of that, which is everything that the game has provided. And that's like something that players are aware of. Should we do everything we can to lessen that? Yes. But like there are inherent risks involved in this process. That's part of the reason the money is so good. So like there's got to be like a fair balance here between that. And I think that they were closer to it last season. I think some guys played too much. And I think that that's something that we can probably try and peel back on. The players have to kind of the other biggest thing here is just like get the money not tied to awards. Get it out. Get that away. The money cannot be tied to awards because it's one thing if it's like, well, yeah, I want to make 65 games because I want to be all NBA because I take pride in my game and I want the acknowledgement of how good I am. It's another thing when it's like, I want to play 65 games because I can make an extra $200 million. That should not be dictated by those types of things. The players should be able to be like, I'd like to make all NBA, but I need a 2 weeks off. I can't do this, man. That's where the league has got to shift to. There are all these changes that need to happen, but there does, I think, continue to be a reasonable expectation of players playing when healthy.
I thought there might even be some adjustment on those game requirements. Maybe even coming into this season, they didn't do that, obviously. So you expect that maybe they will adjust that at some point?
Yeah, I don't know. Because, like, I think the way it's been presented to me is that the CBA is ironclad and neither side is going to want to touch it for fear of losing ground in a negotiation. That if you open up, if you say, like, we want to talk about and maybe amend this, that the other side's going to be like, oh, good, we also wanted to amend this thing. And because there's peace in the land and the new media deal, they don't want to disrupt that, which I get. I just
especially
feel like,
before expansion. Like,
yeah, then this media deal is very important because that expansion deal, they're not going to get a cut for a number of years of the media deal. It's how that structure will be given. But it's frustrating because I'm just like, look, take the 65 game thing. If the teams are like, hey, we really don't want our players over pushing themselves and hurting our playoff chances trying to get to this award limit, and the players don't want it, and the fans are even like, I don't want to see like Tyrese on one leg. If nobody is in favor of this, then it should be like an easy, let's make a common sense adjustment. The apron, I think, the second apron, I think, is a really reasonable thing to be like, hey, so good idea, but it turns out that this is killing us. Like, there should be a reasonable adjustment to make to that. The players are obviously going to be frustrated by the limitation of salaries and spending. The teams are frustrated by the limits that it puts on their flexibility and trying to build a contender and keep their jobs. And the owners are happy because they get to curtail spending and not get blamed for it. But you should still be able to be like, look, can we make some sort of adjustment on this to make it a little less punitive? So maybe this is just more of like a, hey, you really want to be sure rather than a death knell kind of deal. These should be very easy adjustments for a CBA, but any person that is legal adjacent is like, oh no, you don't want to touch the CBA once it's agreed to. Oh no. So I'm kind of like, okay, I guess we're stuck with this until the next time they negotiate, which sucks.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the length of the season, and I just recently learned that hockey also has an 82 game season. I'm like, where did this idea of an 82 game season even come from? That sounds insane, but it's just kind of been that way. And so that will also likely continue.
I think it was fine. I also think it was probably fine when these sports were invented. And I always often wonder, like, were there always injuries and we just don't remember them because it wasn't documented as in depth?
Well,
right?
yeah, because guys weren't as soft as they are today.
So. I mean, that's a suggestion, right? And like Jordan missed an entire season with a foot injury. Like that happened early on in his career, and like that never gets talked about. But like that's a thing that happened. LeBron has not, knock on wood. So I do think that the acceleration of the intensity of athlete explosiveness has definitely contributed to the soft tissue injuries across the board.
Yeah,
there's a lot of evidence for that. For me, the counter to all this is I just continue to believe that if you reduce the schedule and spread it out, that you're going to get so much better games. Yeah. Because every single player I talk to is like, if you give me 3 days off, that next day, like that game, I'm going to be great. I'm going to be so much better than I am when it's every other night. And you would have more lead up time to promote matchups. Like I think about a lot of this with American sports because all these others are like in 3 days time. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with the NBA because it's just you can't even game plan. Drives me nuts. Anyway, yeah, they should shorten the schedule.
Listeners, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1K subs, so please subscribe if you liked what you heard on today's episode. And also subscribe to our Clip channel. And remember, winning is fun, and hopefully we get a lot of winning in the regular season, and not a lot of losing because losing really sucks.